Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare.
Hari Om. Hari Om, everyone. Let's start with invocation.
सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। गीता ध्यानम्। ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनी अम्ब त्वामनुसन्धधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी। नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दाय पत्रनेत्रा येन त्वया भारततैल्यपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीपः प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवेत्रैकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्सः सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला। अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरननडी कैवर्तककेशवा। पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटं नानाख्यानककेसरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितम्। लोके सज्जनषट्परैरहरहः पीपीयमानं मुदा याद्भारतपङ्कजं कलिमला प्रध्वंसि न श्रेयसे। मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणीन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुः सुरासुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः
Hari Om. Okay, so we saw that the route for spiritual progress is Karma Yoga. And Karma Yoga leads to Chitta Shuddhi, which means purification of the mind. And Karma Yoga is nothing but karma done with the attitude of Ishvara Arpana and Prasada. That is, Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, submitting everything to the Lord, to the higher ideal, and Prasada Buddhi, receiving whatever comes as fruits, as Prasada from the higher ideal, from the Lord. And that leads to Chitta Shuddhi, which is purification of the mind. And Chitta Shuddhi leads to Jnana Prapti and Ishvara Bhakti. And that then further leads to liberation. But how do we know that we are making progress? Like if we are going from here to Coorg, then we cross various milestones. But in this journey, how do we know that we are making progress? What are the milestones? And what is it? What is the sure test? Call it the litmus test. Litmus test tells us whether a solution is acidic or basic. But litmus test is also something which is decisively indicative. So what is decisively indicative that can tell us that yes, we are performing Karma Yoga. Yes, we have attained Chitta Shuddhi. Yes, we have attained Jnana Prapti and Ishvara Bhakti. What are these? So let's talk about each one of them one by one. We have already covered a couple of them, so we will revise, and some of them will come in today's session. So Karma Yoga. Now, when you see some, let's say a painter like M.F. Hussain, he does live painting also. He used to do live painting, and he'll take a huge wall and, he'll paint. And then the stroke of his brush, okay? Or when you see Roger Federer playing, he'll run to the baseline and then the ball will be coming at quite a high speed. And then he will turn his body, twist it, and in between his legs, he will hit a winner stroke, okay? Or something like, the cadence that you see in the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, the cadence that comes up when all these hundreds of musicians, various instruments, they're all part of the Philharmonic and, they together play. And then they reach that cadence, that beautiful synchrony in their music. Or the coordination between a soccer team when they are dribbling and passing to each other, or a hockey team when they are dribbling and passing to each other. And you see that and we derive a pleasure out of the beauty, the music, the crescendo, the simple artwork in all these things that I described. And there are millions of others that we ourselves experience in our lives. Now, this is nothing but dexterity in action. And dexterity in action is something that we witness, we see, we experience, we relish it all the time. The litmus test for Karma Yoga is dexterity in action. Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam. When there is dexterity in action, we can say that there is Karma Yoga, which means karma is being done with dedicating whatever is being done to the higher ideal, to the Lord. Chitta Shuddhi. Now, Chitta Shuddhi, let me tell you a story, and this is a real story that happened way back in the 1800s, middle 1800s. So, Ishvara Chandra Vidyasagar, he was a scholar, eminent scholar, and an academician of repute. When the Calcutta University was being formed, when it was being set up, in fact, Ishvara Chandra Vidyasagar, even before Calcutta University and after that, one of his biggest contributions was reforms pertaining to widow remarriage. Traditionally in those days in India, widows were not allowed to remarry, and Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar was a big proponent of widow remarriage, and he introduced reforms that then enabled those kind of laws and regulations to come in place. So when the Calcutta University was being formed, he was responsible for, among others, collecting funds for bringing up the university. And he went to the Nawab of Oudh, or Nawab of Awadh, and one of the richest Nawabs in those times in that region, to collect funds. Now the Nawab was not very, generous towards this idea of formation of this university, nor was he favorable towards Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar. And in those days, the custom to receive donation was to, put forth a tray, and whatever, obviously it was all in kind, whatever donation was being given, jewelry, coins, whatever it may be, used to be put in the tray. The Nawab of Awadh put one of his sandals in the tray. And there was a big furor in the court. Everyone was like, oh my God, what's going on? You could hear that sigh, and you could hear the gasp of horror and astonishment. And, Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar received it with grace, with magnanimity, with gratefulness and thankfulness. He received the gift, and he bowed to the Nawab, and he went out. And people were wondering, this was probably, a very obvious and bad insult. And how is it that Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar didn't react to it? Not only did he not react to it, but he, thanked the Nawab and, left with grace. The next morning, Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar organized an auction of the sandal in front of the palace. And this auction was in the honor of the Nawab, the great Nawab of Awadh, our great ruler. We are auctioning his sandal. Come everyone, please bid for it. And the bids just went over the roof, over the skies. They were crazy, amazing bids. And the funds collected was unprecedented. Nobody even had thought that this kind of funds could be collected. Even the Nawab would not have been giving. Had he donated for the cause, he would have not given anywhere near it. But this was an auction of the sandal of the great Nawab in the honor of the Nawab, and it fetched. Everybody was, going one above the other to bid for this. Some for prestige, some for love, and some for honor, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, the sandal went for an unprecedented, unexpected bid. And the Nawab was then, feeling that, oh my God, this is such a great gesture by Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar. He felt very good about it. He felt very proud, and he felt very pleased, mighty pleased. And he actually matched the contribution that the auction had brought. So this was something that, came about, which nobody thought about. And the collection of funds went through the sky. And it was a great launch to the university. So the litmus test for Chitta Shuddhi is equanimity. Samatvam yoga uchyate, the samatvam, the balance, the equanimity. So the equanimity displayed by Ishwara Chandra Vidyasagar and then followed up with the intelligence that only a balanced mind and intellect can bring about, raised tremendous amount of funding for the university. So we saw what the litmus test for Karma Yoga, which is dexterity and action, and Chitta Shuddhi, which is equanimity is. Okay? And most people that perform really well in whatever they do, you will find both these aspects in their displayed behavior. The Vedas, we have seen, is a repository of all knowledge, all kinds of knowledge, both that are based on desire-oriented, desire-driven, expectation-driven knowledge, and also those based on desireless, something that is dedicated to some higher ideal. So all of these, in terms of how to do such action and beyond that, is available in the Vedas. It is a full-fledged repository. And in the Karma Kanda part of the Vedas, we see that whatever is driven by desire, how do we obtain that, is covered in the Karma Kanda. of the Vedas, or the karma section of the Vedas. And this deals with the outcomes in terms of the three gunas: the tamasic guna, the rajasic guna, and the sattva guna. We saw all of that last time. And what does Bhagavan tell Arjuna? Bhagavan says, "Oh Arjuna, do not seek any of these three. Any of these that fall in the realm of tamas, rajas, or sattva, do not seek them." And he gives 4 tips how not to seek anything that falls in these. And the 4 tips are: number 1, nirdvandvaha. Nirdvandvaha means do not get swayed, do not get carried away by any extremities: joy, sorrow, victory, defeat, and so on. The second one is nitya sattvastaha. Nitya sattvastaha, nitya means always, ever, forever. Sattvastaha in this context is firm. So always be firm. And be firm in what? Be firm in the vyavasayatmika buddhi, which is the buddhi to do karma yoga. The third is nir-yoga-kshema. Nir-yoga-kshema means yoga is seeking something that we do not possess, and kshema is protecting something that we already possess. And Bhagavan says, do not have either yoga or kshema as the goal of your life. Then what do? Atmavan. So nir-yoga-kshemam, the 4th tip is Atmavan. Atmavan means be devoted to the Lord, be devoted to the higher ideal, with bhakti, with devotion, with all of your knowledge. Be devoted is what Atmavan is. So by following these 4 tips, nirdvandvaha, nityasattvastaha, niryoga-kshema, Atmavan, we will be able to not dwell in the realm of the 3 gunas, which are tamas, rajas, and sattva. And Bhagavan uses the example of water bodies. Water bodies which are small water bodies like wells and streams, or large, extremely large water bodies like lakes, which are potable, which carry potable water to quench thirst. Those water bodies, that example he uses to show to Arjuna that in karma yoga nothing is lost, and by gaining the infinite we can subsume the finite. So, and that a person, he further goes on to say that a person who is sullied in his mind and intellect, whose mind and intellect is disturbed, it has impurities, and it can also get disturbed by external elements, that kind of a person, the eligibility of that person is only in karma yoga. The person is qualified to do only karma yoga. And the reason for this is that the person, even if the person tries something else, let us say the person tries jnana yoga, or the person tries bhakti yoga, or the person tries anything else, he or she will not be able to do it to the element that is required to gain proficiency. So in order to do something to the extent that it provides favorable results, the only way, or the first step, is karma yoga, because when you perform karma yoga, the disturbances go away, and that then enables your minds and brings your mind and intellect instruments to a level where you can focus and where you can concentrate on the next step, which goes beyond karma yoga. And that is the reason that karma yoga is the first step in the spiritual path, or in progressing in the spiritual path. And then Bhagavan finally says, while performing these duties, and as you develop more and more of selfless attitude, there is a risk. And that risk is that you will ask, why should I do this? And he says, do not get swayed by that. Why should I do this? Do not succumb to inaction. Even if that thought comes in your mind, push it aside with that nitya sattvastaha attitude and continue doing your karma yoga, is what we saw last time. Now we go further and we take this beyond in terms of what Bhagavan's teachings are. So we will recite the next verse.
Karmajam buddhi yukta hi.
Karmajam buddhi yukta hi.
Phalam tyaktva manishinaha.
Padam tyaktva manishinaha.
Janma bandha vinirmukta. विनिर्मुक्तः
Janma bandha vinirmuktaha
पदं गच्छन्त्यनामयम्
padam gacchantanamayam
कर्मजं बुद्धियुक्ता हि फलं त्यक्त्वा मनीषिणः जन्मबन्धविनिर्मुक्ताः पदं गच्छन्त्यनामयम्
padam gacchanti anamayam. So buddhi yukta means one who possesses the buddhi. What buddhi? Karma yoga buddhi. Yukta means one who is endowed, one who has buddhi. Which buddhi? The karma yoga buddhi. These people, they are manishinaha. Manishinaha means they are very wise, they are smart, capable, dexterous, intelligent. Those are the kind of people who have this buddhi. And once they have this, by giving up, tyaktva, by giving up what? By giving up phalam karmajam. Karmajam means what follows from karma. And the fruit that follows from karma, by giving up that, they become janma bandha vinirmuktaha. That is, liberated from the bondage of birth. So the people who have the karma yoga buddhi, by having that, the wise, they are the wise, and by giving up the phalam that comes from the karma, they become janma bandha vinirmuktaha, that is, liberated from the bondage of birth. And they go or attain, gachanti. What they attain? Padam anamayam. Padam means the feet, anamayam, the supreme abode, the padam, the supreme abode, that is beyond any suffering. So Bhagavan says that the people who follow karma yoga are the wise, and by giving up the attachment to the fruits of their actions, they attain freedom from repeated birth and the supreme abode where there is no suffering. In the Rig Veda, it is said, Tad Vishnu Parampadam, which means the feet of Vishnu is the supreme abode. And that is what Bhagavan is saying in the, as we saw, the Bhagavad Gita is one of the Upanishads too. And that is what he is saying here. We move to the next verse.
यदा ते मोहकलिलं
Yada te moha kalilam
बुद्धिर्व्यतितरस्तरिष्यति
buddhirvyatitarishyati
तदा गन्तासि निर्वेदम्
tada gantasi nirvedam
श्रोतव्यस्य श्रुतस्य च
श्रोतव्यस्य श्रुतस्य च
यदा ते मोहकलिलं बुद्धिर्व्यतितरिष्यति तदा गन्तासि निर्वेदं श्रोतव्यस्य श्रुतस्य च
Yada te, when your buddhi, that is mind and intellect, when your mind and intellect, titarishyati, which is crossing beyond, when your mind and intellect crosses beyond what? Moha kalilam, the dirt of delusion. We talked about it. The first verse, Bhagavan talks about the kalilam that is there in Arjuna's mind. So when your mind and intellect crosses beyond the dirt of the delusion, tada, then, gantasi, you shall attain. Nirvedam. Nirvedam means dispassion. And dispassion towards what? Dispassion towards shrotavyasya. Shrotavyasya is what you are yet to hear, what you are yet to know, what you are yet to experience. Shrutasya cha. Shrutasya, what you have already heard, what you have already experienced, what you have already known. So both these elements, both the known and the unknown, you will attain nirveda. That is, you will be indifferent towards what you know and what is unknown. So passion is something which is very engrossing. It's an engrossing want. You know, it comes from deep attachment to what we saw earlier. I plus I want. It comes from a deep attachment to that. That is passion. It is a loud statement of incompleteness. When you're passionately wanting something, that means that there is some incompleteness within. That is why you want something passionately. It is a loud statement of incompleteness. And passion has the potency to take away discriminative capacity, which is viveka. We saw in the beginning that viveka is how to discriminate between the temporary and the permanent, between the ephemeral and the nitya. So the potency that passion has is to take away that discriminative capacity also. Now, I'm not saying that we should not act with passion, but I'm saying that passion is engrossing want. And passion has the potency to take it away. What? The viveka. On the contrary, dispassion is the capability to not get passionately attached to what? To our own thoughts, our own beliefs, our own actions and the results. The thoughts, beliefs and actions and results come from the body, mind, intellect paradigm. So not getting passionately attached to the body, mind, intellect paradigm. Which means what? We continue to do what we do, but we continue to do what we do with dispassion and with devotion to the higher ideal, to the Lord. And when we continue to do what we do with dispassion and devotion to the higher ideal, to the Lord, we are not acting passionately. And the results are, what God says is that the results of doing actioning like this, in this manner, is much better, much more rewarding than when you take action in a passionate manner. This comes from a sense of completeness. And when you have a sense of completeness, the efficiency of your own action is much better. And it comes out of clarity also, other than completeness. And that clarity is that the pleasure for fulfillment is not possible from outside. The pleasure for fulfillment doesn't come by my body, mind, intellect paradigm working to please the object world. Pleasure may come, but the fulfillment will not come. And that clarity helps us act in this manner. So there was this monk, another monk, who was crossing a river, and along with other people on the boat, who were going from one place to another, one ashram to another, and he had 2 silver pots with him. And there were other people in the boat, and obviously they were, carrying pots too, and all of them had clay pots. So some people in the boat started belittling the monk. Said, look at this, he's supposed to be a monk. He's carrying silver pots. Today it is silver. Tomorrow it will be gold. These people are those, who are supposed to have given away their attachment to worldly things. And look at him. Look at all of us. We are more, quote unquote, more evolved than these monks who are pretending. They have not renounced anything. And he's carrying all this. The monk was listening to all of this. And he just kept quiet. But as it kept going on, he said, he felt duty bound to teach that these people needed some teaching. They needed to understand. So what he did, he picked up his 2 silver pots and he threw it into the river. And then he looked at them and he challenged them, please throw your clay pots into the river. Now that nobody wanted to do. None of these guys, nobody, even those people who were talking and the people who were listening, everyone just held on to their pots as if it was dear life. And then the monk said that it is not about what you have. When you have something which is required to get some work done, then it is a tool for you to get the work done. When you have something as a belonging, it becomes a possession. This is not my possession, whereas your clay pots is your possession. And please remember that possessions have the capability, or they end up possessing the possessor. So what we get too attached towards, that attachment, the object to which we are too attached towards, that ends up possessing us. In fact, it becomes the other way around. It's like the car driver example that I gave in the last satsang. The car driver is driving the car. He loves the car. He takes care of it. He protects it. But he also knows that it does not belong to him. And when the time comes for him to leave it, he leaves it without any hurt. Whereas the owner of the car is not taking care of the car, is not protecting it. But if the car goes away, if it meets with an accident, he is the most hurt about it. So when Karma Yoga and Chitta Shuddhi are there, Nirveda is attained. That is, dispassion is attained. And what is the litmus test of Jnana and Bhakti? The next verse will talk about that.
Shruti vipratipanna te
Shruti vipratipanna te
yadastasyati nischala
yadastasyati nischala
samadhavachala buddhis
samadhavachala buddhir
tada yogamavapsyasi.
tada yogamavapsyasi.
Shruti vipratipanna te yada stasyati nischala samadhavachala buddhis tada yogamavapsyasi.
So we see the word te here in the first line and buddhi in the second line. Te buddhi. Te buddhi means your mind and intellect. What about your mind and intellect? Shruti vip pratipanna. Shruti vip pratipanna means a mind and intellect that is confused, perplexed, agitated, restless. By what? By what we have experienced till now, by what we have heard till now. Here, as much as in the last usage, Shruti typically means hearing, but it refers to experience through all the sense organs, not just the ears. So what we have heard, what we have seen, what we have felt, what we have tasted, all of that, all the past experiences, they cause some confusion, perplexity, agitation, and so on and so forth. And when this kind of a mind, intellect, that is still dwelling on past experiences of what helped us gain and what did not help us gain. In fact, in the last satsang, I talked about it when I was referring to my personal experiences, not ideal. No, I should refrain from talking about personal experience. So what is it I'm remembering 20 years ago in my life? Past experience. Shruti vip pratipanna. That is where I am. What helped me, what didn't help me, what was a good experience, what was not a great experience. So the mind keeps dwelling on these past goods and bads, past highs and lows, and so on and so forth. But Bhagavan says that even this kind of a mind, even a mind that is dwelling on past experiences, when this mind sthasyati nischala, that is stands, sthasyati, remains, nischala. Nischala means firm, immovable. And achala. Achala means steady. So when this kind of a mind that is dwelling in past experiences stands firm and is steady, that mind, it experiences samadhav, that is absorbed in wisdom, that comes from Karma Yoga, Chitta Shuddhi and Nirveda. It is absorbed in wisdom. And when that happens, then tada avapsyasi yogam, you shall attain yogam. So basically Bhagavan says that when your mind is confused, perplexed and so on through past experiences, but still stands firm and steady, then it gets into samadhi and attains yogam. Yogam means realization. So there are two words that are used here, nischala and achala. Nischala means nischala. Chala is chalana. Chalana means movement. Like for example, when the wind is moving, the trees are moving, that is chalana. So nischala means no movement, still. As a flame, a lamp which is still when there is no wind. That is nischala. No confusion, firm, no swaying. The doubts in the mind, when the mind is nischala, that means the doubts in the mind are dispelled. Remember, Arjuna is all of this started with Arjuna's doubts and our doubts. So when all the doubts are dispelled, when clarity is established, that kind of a mind. Now, how does this come about? This comes about from Shravana and Manana. Remember we talked about Guru Upasadana? Okay, when we seek guidance, like when Arjuna sought guidance in the verse number 7, if we remember, right? So when we seek guidance, when we approach the guru, the coach to help us, at that time, the first two things that happen are Shravana and Manana. Shravana means listening, gathering information. Manana means thinking, seeking clarity, asking questions on the information received, removing any gaps that may be there, going through, mulling it over again, and seeking clarity from the guru, from other sources, and so on and so forth. So Shravana and Manana help in Nischala coming in place. It removes doubts. It removes the swaying. It brings in the firmness and the stillness to the mind. Just to deviate a little bit, I do know that a lot of you have lots of questions in mind, but refrain from asking. But, in this context, please, you must ask, you must, other than listening, you must do the practice Manana also. I would sincerely encourage all of you to, not hesitate to express, ask. Please do practice the Manana. And guess what? I will also learn a lot from that. I will get a lot more clarity. Okay, much more Nischala, the swaying, all of us will gain from that. The second word that comes here is Achala. Achala means steady, sure. For example, you are in a Y junction. Like when we were in the army, we used to do a lot of these exercises. In that, you do map reading. And then you don't know where you're going, by the way. You figure out where you're going through maps. You do map reading and you go. And suddenly there's a Y junction and you're thinking, which one to take. When you are sure, even when you're in a Y junction in life, you know which axis that you're supposed to take. That steadiness, that surety is Achala. And that Achala comes from contemplation. Contemplation is called Nididhyasana. It is the third step of Guru Upasadhana. It's actually after Guru Upasadhana. That brings Achala. The clarity that emerges from Nididhyasana is called Shakshatkara. And Shakshatkara is nothing but direct experience, or that leads to direct knowledge, which is Aparoksha Jnana. We all dwelt a lot on Aparoksha Jnana. So, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Shravana and Manana help Nischala come into your mind, and Nididhyasana helps Achala come into your mind. Firmness and steadiness. It's like soaking the gulab jamun in syrup, in sugar syrup. We all have tasted gulab jamun, one of the most delicious dessert items in India, right? How it soaks in imagine eating a gulab jamun without soaking it in the sugar syrup. How will it be? And when it soaks in the sugar syrup, or marinating potatoes, the other day, Deepak and I were talking about how to make this urlai roast. And, you marinate it, sometimes even overnight, okay? It just seeps in. All the spices get into the potato, into the hard potato, or the sugar syrup just gets in deep inside the gulab jamun. And what does it do? It transforms the gulab jamun. It transforms the potatoes. This kind of a marination. In the same way, Nididhyasana, when we do Nididhyasana, in Nididhyasana, knowledge seeps in and transforms the mind and intellect. But for that, one has to soak the mind and intellect in the syrup of knowledge. So we must soak our mind and intellect in the syrup of knowledge. And Bhagavan says, in this way, with the transformed mind and intellect, firmly soaked, firmly in Nischala, that is Nischala soaked. In what? In Jnana. And Achala, or steady. In what? The higher ideal. So firm in knowledge, steady in the higher ideal. Firm in knowledge, steady in bhakti. A mind that is completely soaked in this manner, firm in knowledge and steady in bhakti. Nischala in jnana and achala in bhakti. That mind attains samadhi and further attains realization. That is what Bhagavan is trying to tell here. Tada yogam avapsyasi, attains yoga. The litmus test for jnana and bhakti is yoga. And this is something that I want to deviate a little and mention here. There are lots of schools, I would rather call it religious schools or sects, Some people talk about what realization is in a different way. Others talk about what realization is in a different way. They all argue, fight, debate, discuss. But for us, when we are learning at the level at which we are in, and where we are trying to remove so many impurities from our minds, it does not matter whether the realization is in Aikyam, oneness, where we are all, Tattvamasi, one together, the man and God is one, or whether the realization is in Sharanagati. All of it is okay. You want to say Aikyam? Okay, fine, thank you very much. You want to say Sharanagati? Yes, thank you very much. Different schools of thoughts. How does it matter? Because when we get to that peak, where we are at the verge of Aikyam or at the verge of Sharanagati, it is irrelevant. It does not matter. And it is irrelevant today because we are nowhere near, and we need to focus on learning, not whether this is the ultimate or that is the ultimate. So my request to all of us when we are learning is not get swayed by it. Take everything from all schools. As much as you can seep in, as much as you can soak into that knowledge like Gulab Jamun, soak it in. But don't get swayed by religious beliefs. So I'll tell you a story on this. It's a beautiful story. It's a real life story. So there was this gentleman, Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson was a World War I veteran whose career and domestic life had kind of come into tatters completely because of a drinking problem that led to severe addiction. And he lost his fortune, in addition to his drinking addiction, he also lost his fortune in the stock market, crash of 1929. Now, Bill Wilson, shamed, disgraced, in a mess, completely soaked in alcohol, pun intended. Okay, he was soaked in alcohol, not in Gulab Jamun syrup or knowledge. He admitted himself, so he, at least that much sense he had, he admitted himself to the hospital. And before he admitted himself to the hospital, when he was on his way, he had 4 beers. Okay, that was his level of addiction. And in the hospital, he was under the care of Dr. William Silkworth. And he asks his doctor, how much time do I have? And the response from the doctor is not much. So William says, Bill says, if I don't have any time anyway, then, whatever has happened in life, let me enjoy. What's the problem in drinking, doctor? So I'll just continue to drink. So doctor says, yes, if you want to, though I would still say no, but if you want to do that, do that. But before that, I have a favor to ask of. There is one more guy, and his name is Bob. Okay, and I'm forgetting Bob's name, Bob Smith. So there's one more patient of mine. His name is Bob Smith. He's also in a pretty bad shape, not as bad as you. So if you share your experiences with him, he has some hope of recovery. So if you can go ahead and share some experiences with him, maybe there is a chance that he will take the right fork in the Y junction. So can you please help me? So Bill says, absolutely, doc, I don't have a problem. I'll help you. Strike a deal. You'll take me out for a drink when I come back in the evening. So doctor says, yes, please do this for me. I'll take you out for a drink. So Bill goes to meet Bob and he starts sharing. And in fact, before that, it is said that, before the previous night, before he goes to share with Bob, he is kind of thinking about all of this and he gets a flash and he gets a feeling that, that flash is something very godly. Okay. And the next day he goes to share his stories with Bob, and he shares very deeply and very intimately. He does a very genuine job of sharing. And as he's sharing so deeply and intimately, as he's going through every small detail of his life, what went right, what went wrong, how he was a great soldier and then lost his way, took to addiction, became an alcoholic, the desperations, the joys, all of that he shares. And as he's sharing, he's inside himself, he's sensing a transformation. And he goes on sharing and he goes into deep contemplative nididhyasana. And then he forgets that the doctor had promised him a drink if he shared a story with Bob. So Bill goes back home thinking, contemplating. He's in deep nididhyasana. Completely for this. He's an alcoholic. Even when he was driving to the hospital, he had drinks. But this time he forgets. And guess what? He never touched liquor after that day. Never ever. So those 4 beers were his last beer, alcohol in his life. He goes back transformed, thinking, about his life, about what he has told Bob and all of that. And they keep meeting every now and then. And Bob also goes through a transformation. And both of them start talking to each other, debating, discussing their life, what went wrong, what went right, so on and so forth. And finally, they started thinking about how do we help others who are like us? Like, Bill, you came and helped me. How can we help others? And this was the creation of this organization called Alcoholics Anonymous. So Bill Wilson and Bob Smith are the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they devised the now famous 12-step program that begins with acknowledging that they need help from a higher power, from that higher ideal, whatever that higher ideal may be, right? So millions of people, through this story of Bill and Bob, through this experience of Bill and Bob of being soaked in alcohol and then being soaked in knowledge through Nididhyasana and through all of that, believing in that higher ideal, millions of people have been helped in a positive way to overcome trouble. So if people who are on the verge like this can turn around, anybody else can, and that is what Bhagavan is telling Arjuna, who also was breaking down and thrown away, cast away all his arms and weapons, just given up in the battlefield. So now Arjuna asks a question. And he says, please tell me the characteristics of a person who has perfected himself, who has attained this yoga, as you call it. Please tell me the characteristics, whose wisdom has become established, who is non-wavering, Nischala, who is steady, Achala. What are his characteristics? And Arjuna gives this person a title. He calls this person a Sthita Pragya, one who is stable in wisdom. Sthita, stable, Pragya, in wisdom. What is the nature of such a person? Now, the quality of Arjuna's first question, this is his first question after Sri Krishna has started teaching. The quality of Arjuna's first question shows his inherent smartness. Not only that, it shows his high level of spiritual attainment, where he has reached, the progress that he has made. It also shows that he has been paying attention to Bhagavan as he's been teaching him, and that he is also coming out of his delusion. It's a very smart question. So let's see what his question is. Arjuna Uvacha
Sthita Prajnasya ka bhasha
Sthita Pragyasya ka bhasha
Samadhistasya Keshava
Samadhistasya Keshava
Sthita Dikkim Prabhasheta
Sthitadi Kim Prabhasheta
Kimasita Vrajeta Kim.
Kimasita Vrajeta Kim.
Arjuna Uvacha Sthita Prajnasya ka bhasha Samadhistasya Keshava Sthita Dikkim Prabhasheta Kimasita Vrajeta Kim.
Sthita Pragyasya, that person whose wisdom is established with Nischala and Achala. Samadhistasya, one who is in Samadhi, absorbed in the wisdom, soaking in, like that Gulab Jamun example. So normal people are mostly in two states, awake or waking state and sleep. But those who are deep in contemplation, those who are deep in Nididhyasana, they also experience a third state. That is the state of Samadhi. They are established in stillness. They are Achala in Nischala. Established Achala in stillness, Nischala. That is the state of Samadhi. That is the third state, which is experienced by people who are deep in contemplation. And Arjuna asks, what is their nature? What are their characteristics? Ka bhasha. What are his or her lakshana? Lakshana means nature. And how do you describe it? Sthitadi, that person who is established in wisdom and out of Samadhi. Okay, initially when in Samadhi, the other is out of Samadhi. Sthitadi is out of Samadhi. That person, Kim Prabhasheta, what does he speak? how does he speak? Also implying how does he think, because the thought is what converts into speech. So for me, I sway between the extremities, the joys and the sorrows, the victory and the defeat, the profit and the loss, and so on and so forth. And when I sway between, like a pendulum between these extremities, I know how I think, I know how I speak, all the stressed out actions and reactions that we make, I know. And Arjuna also says that I know that how I behave, in chapter 1. How is this person, how does he behave? What are his characteristics? How, when he comes out of the samadhi, how does he speak? And what does he speak? Then kim asita, how does he sit? Asita means sit. And what it implies is, how does he sit means, how does he quieten himself? So how does he go back into a quiet state? When you sit down, when this person sits down, he quietens himself or herself. So again, for me, either my mind is wandering, okay, when I sit down, or I go to sleep. But how is it that this person go back into absorption again, into that mode of absorption in that wisdom, in that knowledge? After expressing, how does he withdraw? After expressing, after engaging, how does he disengage? And then vrajeta kim, how does he walk about? Vrajeta means, how does he walk? How does he go about his work? Walk about just doesn't mean walk. How does he go about his work? How does he interact with other people, with the object world, with the outside world? How does he interact? How does he engage with the world of senses and with the world of objects? And how does he re-engage with them? So within Arjuna's first question, there are 4 questions. The first one is about the nature of the Sthita Pragya when he or she is in samadhi, is in absorption. And the other 3 are about the nature of the Sthita Pragya when he or she is out of samadhi. Sthitadi. Out of samadhi, Sthitadi. Another word for out of samadhi is Vyutthana. Vyutthana means opposite, it's opposite of samadhi. So how does one become good, in anything? How does one become, good at, say, painting, like M.F. Hussain, like playing tennis, like Roger Federer? How does one become really good at singing, like those orchestra players or these excellent singers, like, let's say, M.S. Subbulakshmi or Kishore Kumar? And how do people really get good at language, at poetry? So all of these, there is most of the art aspects, most of the science aspects, there is an established benchmark. And when you reach that best established benchmark, that means you're good. So for me to be a good singer, all I have to do is imitate a good singer who is an established great singer. If I can imitate an established great poet, I also start becoming a good poet. So by imitating the perfect, we get better. And we proceed towards perfection. So Arjuna's question is brilliant because he's asking, what are the qualities of this perfect person? Because I want to imitate this perfect person. And by imitating this perfect person, I'm going to become perfect myself. So now begins a very famous and interesting part of Sri Krishna's teaching, termed as Sthita Pragya Lakshana. So we will start with the first one. We won't have time to answer all of Arjuna's 4 questions. We will see how Bhagavan answers the first question today, and then we'll continue next Saturday with the others. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha.
Sri Bhagavanu Vacha.
Shri Bhagavanu Vacha.
Prajahati yada kaman.
Prajahati yada kaman.
Sarvan partha manogatan.
Sarvan partha manogatan.
Atman yevatmana tushtaha.
Atman yevatmana tushtaha.
Sthita prajnastadochyate.
Sthita pragyastadochyate.
Sri Bhagavanu Vacha. Prajahati yada kaman. Sarvan partha manogatan. Atman yevatmana tushtaha. Sthita prajnastadochyate.
Yada is when. Yada sarvan, all sarvan kaman, all desires. Yada sarvan kaman, when all desires. And all desires means all kinds of desires. Kama, sankalpa, sandeha, all of these things. Shraddha, ashraddha, all of these aspects. When all of them what? Pertaining to what? Pertaining to manogatan. Manogatan is pertaining to the mind intellect. When that is prajahati. Prajahati means, jahati means give up. Prajahati means completely give up. So when these desires that are pertaining to the mind are completely given up, and Atmani eva Atmana, Atmani in the self, only Atmana as the self, in the self as the self. And what in the self as the self? Triptaha, Tushtaha. Tushtaha means Triptaha. Triptaha means Purna, fulfilled. When absolute complete satisfaction is there. So absolute complete satisfaction in the self as the self, when that stage is reached. So example given here in the scriptures is that of a salt doll. Imagine a salt doll that goes to measure the depth of an ocean. So what happens to it? So salt doll goes deep in, touches the bed of the ocean. It's a salt doll. So it is, where is it now? It is in the bed of the ocean as salt. It went into the depth of the ocean. It is now in the bed of the ocean as salt. The doll is gone. So happiness of deep sleep is the happiness of ignorance. Okay, blissfully ignorant. When you are deep asleep, the state of deep sleep, you are blissfully ignorant. The happiness of samadhi, on the contrary, is the happiness of wisdom. You are blissfully wise. So Bhagavan says that in that state of being blissfully wise, in that state, what is it called? Tada uchyate is called sthita pragya, of steady wisdom. So if we take, let's say there's a child who goes to the mall with her parents and she immediately runs to the toy store. Okay. Now the other two, the parents, they have no attraction towards the toy store. They are rather more attracted towards the excitement of the child. But none of the toys out there truly attract the parents. The same child, when she grows up and goes into the mall with her child, she gets very drawn towards the sari store as an adult. The other two are, at least in the first case, when the child is grown, the parents are excited because of the excitement of the child. Here, neither the father nor the child are excited about the mother's, attraction to the saris. Neither care. Okay. So what has happened here? That child has outgrown her interest for toys and has, got interested in something else. Has transcended beyond one interest to another interest. This happens to us all through our lives. We move on from one attraction to another attraction, then another third attraction, and so on and so forth. Right? So once a person transcends out of the state of wanting an object, then he or she is no longer seeking that object. In the same way, a sthita pragya is not attracted to the world of objects. It's not that he does not enjoy the world of objects or she does not enjoy the world of objects. They are just not attracted to the world of objects. Exactly like a parent, it's not like the parent is not enjoying the toy shop, but they are not attracted. If they had come alone, they would not have gone inside. They have gone inside only for the child. So similarly, the sthita pragya is transcended the world of objects and is not attracted towards it. Desires are not suppressed, but they are subsumed. They are not rejecting anything. They are not rejecting any pleasure. If some pleasure comes through, they will take. If a gulab jamun comes, they will eat it. They will enjoy it. But they are not finding where can I get gulab jamun. They have discovered something which is bigger, something which is higher. So, and how does all this come about? It comes about from the thought. And when they discover something higher, that is when they become of steady wisdom. So when you say this all comes from a thought, what does it mean? What is a thought? Okay, have you ever thought about what is a thought? Right? So a thought cannot be there without objects. This is a beautiful concept. Without the object, a thought cannot exist. So try to think of something without an object. Is it possible? Unless you have a name, a form, a theme, an emotion, all of these are objects. Without that, you cannot have a thought. It's impossible. It's not possible at all. If I say camel right now, the image of a camel will come to your mind. Till the last second, there was no camel in your mind. So every thought is attached or linked to some object or the other. When objects are removed, the thought is not there. And we are aware of millions of objects. Luckily, if all these millions and trillions of objects had become our thoughts, then you would have gone crazy. You would need a psychiatrist. Thankfully, all of them are not there in our mind all the time. They come and go. So when I become conscious of an object, it becomes a thought, which means what? Which means thought is equal to object plus consciousness. So simple mathematics, consciousness is equal to, therefore, consciousness is equal to thought minus object. So if you remove an object from the thought, you have pure consciousness. Just as a dream disappears or dissolves into a waking state, similarly, when we quieten the mind towards the object world, these thoughts get dissolved into consciousness. That is what happens with a Sthita Prajna. So the spiritual practice is nothing but transcending from the world of objects and desires and helping the mind and intellect move on to something which is much more related to inner exploration, which is the subject. And when that happens, over a period of time, we pass through the chain of Karma Yoga, Chitta Shuddhi, Jnana Prapti, Ishwar Bhakti, and realization. That is the Yogam. And yoga is nothing but yoking the attention of the mind and the intellect exclusively to the higher. That is what yoga is. So we will see in the next satsang the other three answers. We'll pause here and we'll resume next Saturday. And we'll take up the answers that Bhagavan gives to the other three questions or the sub-questions that are part of his first question. Hari Om. Thank you. We'll say the invocation.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Thank you. Any
Hi,
thoughts?
Srini.
Hi, Aditi.
Yeah. Yes, hi. First of all, the monk and the silver pot story, which explained the difference between a possession and a tool. Apt and very well narrated. Yes.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first one is related to Karma Yoga. So what you said is that Karma Yoga, to do Karma Yoga, right? Or to be successful in doing Karma Yoga, you need the dexterity in action and equanimity, which is a balanced mind or intellect. I got it right?
Actually, it is what I said was that dexterity in action is a litmus test. When you see dexterity in action, see, when I see Federer making that musical shot, it's actually tennis, huh? It's a sport, but the shot looks, it flows like it's a musical tone. It's beautiful action, it's dexterity, it's so beautiful, pretty to look at. And when that happens, it actually makes Federer look handsome. Huh? So So when that happens, that means that the person is performing Karma Yoga. It is a litmus test for Karma Yoga. So when you observe dexterity in action, it means there is Karma Yoga.
Okay, so my question is not that. So, and also you said that Karma Yoga, when you do Karma Yoga, disturbances go away, right?
It leads to Chitta Shuddhi, yes.
Yes, so the disturbances go away. So this is the litmus test, dexterity in action and equanimity, right? For Karma Yoga.
Equanimity is the litmus test for Chitta Shuddhi. When there is equanimity, that means the mind has attained purity. So even for us normal people, when we are looking at something, let us say for the next 1 hour, I'm in a very balanced state of mind. After that, I lose my temper. At least for that 1 hour, there was equanimity. So when the equanimity goes away, that means there is the Chitta Shuddhi goes away, the purity goes away. When the equanimity is there, the purity is there. And if equanimity is there all the time, that means Chitta Shuddhi is there all the time.
Okay, all right. Now, my question is that Lord Krishna also goes on to say that you should not stop, you should keep acting, you should not let any of the disturbances affect you. But is that really possible? I mean, what if while doing Karma Yoga, you are not being successful? Then how do you get control that dejection that kind of affects you? The disappointment, you know?
Right.
How do you take care of that?
Right. So if we have to keep in mind, it takes practice. Every time we do something, if we do it as a arpana, Ishvara arpana buddhi, as a dedication to the higher ideal, then small disturbances will not affect us. When the result comes, I play a tennis match, I've lost it, 6-0, okay? And if I take it as a prasada, if I take it as God's gift to me, the disturbances will be minimized. So this takes a lot of practice. You have to keep doing it again and again and again. You have to keep reminding yourself to do again and again. When we do this Karma Yoga, at that time, you will experience that you don't feel the dejection. And that lack of feeling dejection, the lack of minimization of negative thoughts is what leads to Chitta Shuddhi.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I have another one. In the modern world, you said that we should be soaked in knowledge, right? The realization of being soaked in knowledge, it comes much later in life. Like we are born and then, we are brought up, go to school, institutions, we get married, we have kids. And then later on in life, when you grow a little old, that's the normal way of doing it. And we think, okay, now we should go towards the spiritual aspect of it. We should explore spirituality. So what do you have to say about that?
That's true. In fact, earlier one of the sessions we talked about, most people say that, I'll wait for retirement, then I'll start reading spiritual texts. This is for later stage in my life, once I'm 70 years old. And then whenever people do it, they pursue this path, then they say, oh, I wish I had started earlier. So imagine, yes, the fact is that in our lifestyle, the way the world has evolved, at least in the last 100 years or so, maybe 150 years or so, we first take the object world. We pursue the object world. Like you said, education, then job, then success, money, title, house, car. All of us have little like that. We first pursue the object world and then we think about spiritual pursuit. Imagine it had been opposite. So in the olden days, when you went to a Gurukul, not the modern school, but you went to a Gurukul, the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, they are all part of the curriculum. Nowadays, it's all gone. And even in the Western world, the Bible was part of the curriculum. In the Mughal world, the Muslim world, the Quran was part of the curriculum. But now it is all changed. Even when you do religious text, you do it for the object world. So how do I use religious texts to attain something in the object? It's completely twisted. So yes, I agree with you. If only we can change, if only we can, make it 180 degree the other way around, pursue and start with pursuing spirituality, attainment in the object world itself, enjoyment in the object world itself will become that of much, much, much better quality. Because we have seen that living in the object world, if you are spiritually more aware, you enjoy the object world much more. It's not like we don't enjoy. We do enjoy. It's like the monk, enjoying the two silver pots. But the purpose of enjoyment is different. The purpose of enjoyment is the higher ideal. So yes, I wish, over a period of time, over the next 100, 150 years, it will flip 180 degrees. It will be a much better world to live in.
Thank you, Srini.
Thank you. Petra, you said you have 2 questions. I'm going to read what you're texting. So Petra has said here, she says about passion. You said we should practice dispassion. Does it mean we shouldn't be passionate about anything? What about all the great people, the artists who achieved something? That is, famous fashion designers. They have been very passionate about their topic, about their pursuit. That is her first question. She has one more question, which I'll read later. So what are we saying? We are saying that dispassion is nothing but the nirveda, the dispassion, is to ensure that you do not get so passionately attached to the object desires, to the body, mind, and intellect, that you live, breathe only for that. Actually, if you see most of these successful people that you are talking about, like the examples that I gave, whether you have Roger Federer or whoever, they are dispassionate about a bad stroke. They quickly dismiss it and move on. And they are dispassionate about the best stroke. When we are drooling over that, between the leg stroke that Federer makes, he behaves as if he has done nothing. So he just moves on. For him, there is no passion. So the point here to understand is that when we get passionately attached about something, we get passionately attached to the object part of that. We get passionately attached to the result part of that. And that actually disturbs the mind more and reduces the efficiency and the effectiveness, rather than help it in a positive manner. So if we practice dispassion, we will see that our output gets better. The dexterity in our action gets better. Right? Nirveda is it's definitely something that will help Karma Yoga be better also. Although Nirveda comes from Karma Yoga, but it's a cycle. Nirveda will come after Karma Yoga, but it will also help Karma Yoga be better. And the best example I can give you is this. You look at these people when they hit a beautiful shot, when they sing wonderfully, when they come out with an excellent design. We will all be raving about it, but they themselves will be, you will see equanimity. You will see stability. A person who has achieved something extraordinary and is raving about it, you will often find that the next extraordinary achievement does not follow. They will disappear into oblivion. But a person who is coming back again and again and again with better and better and better achievements, they do not rave about their extraordinariness. It is the others who are raving about it. So dispassion is any day better than passion. Dispassion is dedicating it to the higher ideal, which then helps better achievement in life. Whereas passion is dedicating it to our own selfish desires, which will then take away from the beauty, the dexterity, and the equanimity. It takes away from the dexterity and equanimity. So the great people, the great artists are actually dispassionate. They are not passionate. And you please see this. You please see, take any great artist, great achiever, you will observe this. So Petra's second question, hope Petra have answered this question, and others can add to this if they wish. But the second question, going ahead, you said that by imitating the perfect, we get better. But what about the authenticity? Be you, don't imitate anybody. So by See, what I meant to say when I said what I said was that most of the world is made of discoveries. Okay, there is very few invention. The ultimate original is invention. The original creation, if you go back to it, other than God's creation, what is it that man has created? Within that realm of, within that world of God's creation is what we are discovering. We talk about inventing Mars, but did we really invent Mars? We talk about inventing some new pharmaceutical drug, but did we really invent it? We just put together a few chemicals and came up with something. All of it, all of man's effort is a discovery. So when we are only discovering, we are only imitating, right? We are only doing something which is already there. So when we, but going back, what I said when I took that example was that if I am aspiring to become a good singer, and I look at an already established good singer who is acknowledged and who I believe is a good singer, who is a great singer, and I try to imitate that person, I do better. I mean, an honest confession to you is that I have, in my life, all I've done is imitation. That's the truth. And I have no qualms in admitting that. You know, there's very less of originality in me. Because first of all, I didn't focus enough during my education time to get the degrees that were required for me to be original. Like I was telling you the other day, I ran engineering companies, but I'm not an engineer. So I have only imitated other people who I have seen are successful, who I have seen are dispassionate, who have genuinely done great work, and I have blindly imitated them. And guess what? It has made me better. And when you do this, when you become better and better, you will find that you are doing something which is your original. It comes out. The original comes from within. The original doesn't come from an effort. The effort is imitation. But you will suddenly discover that you have created something original which others will then follow. That is how it happens. Thanks, Petra. I hope you're enjoying Coorg. That was a beautiful view which you showed initially when we started.
Shrini, Deepak here.
Hi, Deepak.
Today was the 12th satsang.
No, today was the 15th, 1-5. 15th. Yeah. Hey, not bad. Huh? We all have not missed a Saturday. Thank you very much. 15 Saturdays in a row.
Amazing. Actually, the time has really flown. The lectures are obviously becoming tougher and tougher. Yeah.
That's true.
So we had to probably find a way to simplify them. Yeah. I don't know how this will happen. This is why.
Can I interrupt? To interrupt, there's one way. I'm going to read out what Petra has written. Thank you, Srini. I have to think about it again. That's the only way to simplify it. You have to go through it again. You have to think about it, put it in your context of your life. That's the only, like I said, when I go through this, I, evolve so much. I get to, every single time when I'm revising, when I'm reading, when I'm speaking here, it gets better and better and better. So the only way to simplify it is to go through it again.
Yeah, sure. The question I have is, we today talked about, go away, not go away, but I mean, ignore objects, objective word, right? The objects are coming to our life through senses, 5 senses, yeah. And these senses are part of us. I do not know how. Is it an impossible quiz which is given to us to master the senses? It sounds like a impossible Rubik cube or impossible puzzle to solve. Or there is some design in this itself, yeah. So this is my question, yeah.
True. I mean, we have to use our senses. We have to use our faculties that are there, the body, mind, intellect faculties. The only way that we can transcend is by using. That's the only way. For example, we have cars, right? But then on a Sunday morning or on a Saturday morning, like today, I missed it, but some of my friends, they went on a 50-kilometer cycle ride. They could have as well taken the car and gone. Why did they take cycle and do this 50-kilometer ride? They did it for enjoying the, you know, the climate, the weather, the thrill that you get from doing this exercise, the fresh air that you experience at 6:30 a.m. in the morning, and so on and so forth. You could have also taken the car and gone, but the only way to transcend what you have is by using it and going beyond it. And if we don't go beyond it, then it's like the possession thing that we talk about. When we possess something, we become possessed by the object that we possess. So where do we draw the line? Where do we use our faculties to an extent of using it as tools and not become the guys who hold on to their clay pots compared to the monk who was able to throw his clay pots away? So for the monk, the pot as well as the faculties were tools. So yes, of course, we have to use our senses, but we cannot become possessed by our senses. That is what spirituality shows us. Deepak, more contemplation, more thinking, more discussing is what will lead to more clarity. I don't think you are fully satisfied with the answer.
No, I think I got a hint. Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea is to engage or use the object, but not get possessed by the object, and move on. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think kind of similar question Siddharth has texted here. So Siddharth says how to control a desire of material or some aspirations. If we don't have any motivation, do you think it would be easy to move ahead in life? If we don't have anything to look forward to, do you think we stop growth or just get stuck there? Thoughts, please. So see, actually, you know what? A lot of this we keep coming back again and again and again to the core. And the core is from where we started, which is Ishvara Arpana Buddhi, Prasada Buddhi. You know, when we do things with dedication to a higher ideal, a higher sense of purpose, a holistic goal, something bigger than ourselves. And even in our own lives, from wherever we are, whatever we have achieved, whatever we have done in life, from wherever we are till today, we can see that every single time we did something for a bigger cause, something for our family, something for our larger organization, a team of people, for our friends, for the poor, we found that we achieved much more satisfaction and we were motivated to do more of it. So this is something that we have, all of us also have experienced. So it's not like, you know, even before reading the Bhagavad Gita, we have experienced it. So it is only a reinforcement of what is the reality. So all the scriptures are trying to tell us is that if we focus on the higher ideal, if we focus on getting the impurities, which is nothing but disturbances which are there in our body, mind and intellect, reduced, minimized and to zero, then our motivation goes up, our satisfaction goes up, we are the Sthita Prajna, all of that happens. So all we are saying is that the motivation that we are talking about that will go away, in fact that will increase if we have that kind of an attitude, the buddhi, the vyavasayatmika buddhi, that actually helps in getting higher motivation, that actually helps in getting higher satisfaction. And the fact is that each one of us, you know, I'm sure each one of us here can give examples where we experience that in our lives. So it's just a reminder that we have to keep doing it every single time. And the more we do it, the better the life is. Anyone else wants to add to this? I'm just going to look at your chat once again. So if we control a desire of material or some aspirations, so we don't need to control, that the scriptures do not say, like I talked about a little while ago, we are not restricting anything. We are not putting a block on anything. We are not controlling anything. We are just saying that if something comes our way, fine, thank you very much. But we are not running after the object world. We are working with the attitude of Karma Yoga. And when we do that, we will find that there is more motivation. See, one of the things that I'm just going to take 2 minutes, one of my jobs in my life for a number of years now is to talk to new people who join our organization. Okay. So every once in a month or twice in a month, there will be a bunch of new joiners and we have to talk to them. So I ask them a couple of questions and I tell them something. The first question that I ask them is, so currently my organization name is Educational Initiatives, EI. So I'll ask them, is EI aligned to you? Okay, and everybody see, normally we all hear about whether individual is aligned to the organization. We don't hear about, is the organization aligned to me? So the first question is EI aligned to you? And the answer to that is that in this, I have certain aspirations. It is always good to have aspirations. Just that those aspirations should be linked to a higher ideal, should be linked to a higher sense of purpose. So those aspirations which are linked to a higher sense of purpose, does this organization have the potential to satisfy those? Will those be achieved here? Or should it be in some other organization? If the answer is yes, that in this organization I can achieve my aspirations that are linked to higher ideal, that means the organization is aligned to me. If it is not going, I'm not going to achieve those here, then I should look for some other organization. The second question is the organization loyal to you? Is EI loyal to you? So again here, oftentimes it is about individual loyalty to the team, to the organization. Here I say, is the organization loyal to you? And how do you answer if the organization loyal to you? So I say that imagine that you are working in this company you've just joined about a week old, but imagine you're working for 3 years. And after 3 years, everybody in the organization knows about you. Today no one knows about you. You don't know anyone. But 3 years down the line, everyone knows about you and you know about everyone. In that situation, will you still join this organization? So if you came in with that 3-year knowledge inside your head, God has injected 3 years of knowledge into you, will you join this organization? If the answer is yes, that means the organization is loyal. Now, there's one more way to prove loyalty. Today I go to my manager and say, sir, I'm resigning. And there are 3 ways my boss can react, okay? The boss can say, typically it is oh, is that so? What happened? We need to, things are going well. I didn't think that you will quit. Can I do something to change your mind? And then, it will move on to understanding, saying, oh, okay, I understand. Yes, I agree with your career decision. Then it will move to handover. How can you help hand over your job to somebody else? So it is a neutral discussion. The other way is you'll hear a boss sigh of relief from the boss. I will say, oh my, you'll audible sigh of relief. The audible sigh of relief is like, I was trying to fire you. I couldn't build up the courage to tell you. Or I was trying and I was looking for an opportunity to tell you to leave. Thank God you came and resigned. Go. And I'm so relieved. The third way the boss will react is, what are you talking? Don't joke. You're busy, I'm busy, we don't have the time. And you'll say, no, sir, I'm serious about it. And the boss will say, hey, you're kidding me. Come on, yeah, let's not waste time. You say, no, sir, I'm serious. Boss will say, what can I do to stay? You need to be here. What can I do to keep you in the team? Obviously, the last one is the loyal boss. The organization and the boss are loyal to you. So I say that, before you join, when you're working, you need to find out ways that the organization is loyal to and aligned to you. And as long as the organization is loyal and aligned to you, then you flip it. You have to become a spoke in the wheel. Then you can't be asking about what's in it for me. See, most employees, the problem when they don't do well in their career, when they hit a ceiling, when the career growth curve flattens, it happens when the question, what's in it for me, becomes the prime motivator for them to work. When what's in it for me becomes the prime motivator, I can guarantee you your career growth will start flattening. When what's in it for the organization is your prime motivator, your career will continue to rise. I guarantee that to you. My 30 years of experience, I can guarantee this, which is what Bhagavan Sri Krishna is saying. Do karma yoga, Ishwararpana buddhi, prasada buddhi. That is what it is. The minute you turn it to what's in it for me, problems, disturbances, dissatisfaction, lack of motivation, don't feel like going to work in the morning, all that comes. So Sid, I hope I addressed your question.
I have another one, Srini. This is in continuation with Petra's question about discovery and imitation. So you said that if we imitate a better person, we get better in that, isn't it? But there have been so many leaders where I see a lot of authenticity. Take the example of Mahatma Gandhi. He started the Satyagraha movement all on his own. And what triggered that was an incident that happened in South Africa. Right. So I feel there are some exceptions to this, some exceptions to imitation. What do you say?
See, like I said earlier, we don't know. We see, the world sees the originality. Okay, the world sees what. So we can imitate Mahatma Gandhi's. So this is a great example, the Satyagraha. What did this man do? This old man, feeble man with this cotton cloth hung on him, took that stick and he started walking. Did he turn around and see who is following him? Did he bother about how many people say yes, no? He believed in it. He had the conviction. He knew that this salt Dandi March was, a big thing. And he had faith in it and he kept going. And soon enough, forget about him looking at who is following me. The entire nation was following me. Okay. So that conviction. So leaders need to have conviction, faith, belief in what they do. So we can imitate him. Okay.
Yeah.
Because he demonstrated something which worked, which really was for a higher ideal. It was not for him. If you look at him, he didn't want anything out of it. He didn't get anything out of it. He was not the first Prime Minister of India. He was there till India became independent. After that, he went into oblivion. He didn't enjoy the fruits of it. How do we know? He would have attained satisfaction inside. If we define the fruit of all of that as the Prime Minister's chair, he was not the guy who got it. But maybe he lived the most satisfied life. So there are a lot of elements that we don't know. We don't know what he followed in South Africa. He was supposedly thrown out of the train.
Thrown out of it, yes,
okay?
yes.
So that he must have learned something there which he followed later on. Where he chose not to imitate. See, where you chose to imitate, you also chose not to imitate. So when you see a successful example, you imitate. When you see an established excellent work, when you see an established Sthita Pragya, you follow that Sthita Pragya. When you see an established person who has not done something well, you choose not to imitate. That they are also a good lesson in life, right? So both ways. So in Mahatma Gandhi's case, I'm sure he learned a lot. For him to achieve what he achieved, he had to be a good student, which the world doesn't know. They don't talk about. If you read his biography, there are a few things. He talks very openly about his own learnings. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Siddharth had one more comment. So Siddharth says, as we know, one way or another, we are a bit fortunate to have a sense of financial and mental stability or something is there, we have the time to think about our inner self. Do you think Karma Yoga for a common man who is trying to meet the daily ends can attain peace? So Siddharth, I think you joined today. This was probably the first, I'm seeing you today for the first time, I think. So I talked about in one of the earlier satsang, I talked about nowadays in the COVID situation, you see all these farmers who, they are struggling. You know, yesterday I also heard that lots of musicians are struggling, okay? Because weddings are not happening. So the musicians normally perform in temples, temples are closed. They perform in weddings, weddings are not happening. So a lot of the, they perform in these big concerts, kacheris and all that, they are not happening, okay? So their musicians are struggling, farmers are struggling, okay? Most farmers sell their produce to agents and the agents take it to the market and sell it. Today, the agents, most agents are not working. So we actually have farmers come directly to our colony and sell. So I was talking about that earlier. So these are people who are struggling to make their daily, ends meet. And, if the farmer needs to cycle, come here, sell, go back and buy or, make the food for dinner. If he doesn't come here, sell and go back, the family is not going to have dinner that night. For some reason, if he is not motivated enough to come, okay, like the example that I gave was he's cycling and he's cycling very hard against the wind and he's still doing because he has the higher sense of purpose. What is his higher sense of purpose? If he had the thought that I need to sell my vegetables and get 110 rupees, he may say that, okay, forget 110 rupees, I'll go home. But his higher sense of purpose is that I have to feed my family. So Siddharth, to answer your question, the poor people have a bigger, higher sense of purpose than people like you and me who have all the facilities. We get, diverted into all other luxuries of life that we forget the higher sense of purpose. The poor people are driven by actual higher sense of purpose. To feed his child in the evening and make sure that the child does not sleep hungry is his ideal. That is his God. And they have more gods in their world than we do. So they actually work a lot more for something else, not for selfish purpose. They have to work for something bigger. In that sense, maybe they are fortunate, more than us.
Hi, Srini. JB here.
JV sir, hi.
I was just thinking, you have a sense of purpose which is not really for yourself, and you want to achieve something. I'll just give you an example. Like I was in Mysore, it was totally barren land and land was also not given. But I wanted the whole selection board to come up. So in order to achieve that, I had to do certain things which were not really ethical. So means to achieve your purpose sometimes may not be good. Is it justified? Though it is not for my good. Only it gave me satisfaction that yes, I got it done.
So two things. One is that you have to be very sure. One. And two, the time later on will prove whether you were right or wrong. For example, if you go to Mahabharata and you compare Mahabharata with Ramayana, Ramayana is very much about the ethics of life. What is the right way? Sri Rama demonstrated the absolute right way of living at extreme personal discomfort. So no wrong will be ever done, even if it causes unbelievable amount of discomfort. Whereas Sri Krishna told us various ways of doing things which may not appear right, but the purpose was served. The higher ideal was served. So Sri Krishna told Arjuna, kill Karna, even though he is trying to fix his chariot wheel. It is not as per the rules of the war, but do it. And do it because of the higher. There are hundreds of stories in the Mahabharata where the rules are twisted. Krishna is a master of twisting rules to achieve the larger goal, the righteous goal, the dharmic goal. So if what you did was for dharma, time will establish that it was right. And maybe when you look today, it will tell you whether it was dharma. Mahabharata is a fantastic story of how to twist rules to achieve for the cause of dharma. Anyone else? Any other point? Like Deepak says, yes, it is, getting a little bit more complicated. But like I was telling the other day, it's actually very simple. It is very complicated yet very simple. Because if you go through it again and again, it keeps coming down to how do you simplify what appears very complicated. It's like the golf swing. I know JV sir plays golf. I don't know how many of others have experience in golf. A golf swing is a keep it simple analogy. The swing of your golf club, the simpler it is, the smoother it is, the better the stroke and the longer distance the ball will traverse. Little bit of complication in your swing and the ball, goes haywire. It can go miles to the wrong direction. So keeping it simple, how do you make complex things simple? In fact, even the modern world, to Aditi's point, we have started with worrying about the object world. People have become experts in complicating simple things. How can we twist it around to 180 degrees to simplify complex things? Because at the end of the day, everything is simple. So if we can think about how to simplify things, we need to go through it a few times, again and again and again. And we find that it is actually quite simple. So we also have to learn the art of simplifying complex things. Thank you. Hari Om. See you next Saturday. Hari Om.